$80 million couldn't save her marriage, and she discovered that in the cruelest way possible. Evelyn Carter stood frozen outside her husband's office, the celebratory flowers slipping in her hand, her 12-year-old son pressed silently against her side. Just hours earlier, she had become an $80 million winner. Certain this miracle would finally earn her respect, safety, and a place she could no longer be pushed out of. Then came the sounds behind the closed door. Soft laughter, a woman's voice, and her husband's confident, intimate, unashamed. In that moment, Evelyn understood something devastating. The life she had protected for decades had been built for someone else. And the man she trusted had never feared losing hers because he believed she had nothing of her own. What Richard Carter did next would strip away his mask completely. And a single, easily missed detail, one no one bothered to question, would become the quiet trigger for everything that followed. Before the story begins, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and your local time. And if you believe in the power of women who rise in silence, don't forget to subscribe. For most of her marriage, Evelyn Carter lived in the background of other people's achievements. From the outside, her life looked enviable. A large home in a quiet tree-lined neighborhood, charity galas twice a year, holidays that appeared in framed photos on the living room wall. And at the center of it all stood Richard Carter, polished, articulate, respected, a man people admired without hesitation. What they didn't see was how carefully Evelyn had arranged her life around his success. She had learned early on that Richard preferred calm to questions, agreement to discussion. When he spoke about work, she listened. When he made decisions, she adjusted. When his career demanded long nights, unexpected trips, or sudden relocations, she absorbed the inconvenience without protest. Someone had to keep life stable, and she had decided long ago that person would be her. Evelyn never told anyone how many times she had postponed her own plans. The certification she nearly completed, but set aside because Richard needed her focus elsewhere. The small consulting work she quietly declined because it conflicted with his schedule. The invitations she turned down so she could attend his functions, instead smiling beside him, always introduced as my wife and nothing more. She told herself it was partnership. Marriage required sacrifice, didn't it? Their son Lucas was born during one of Richard's most demanding career years. Evelyn learned to be both parents at once, teacher, nurse, protector, while Richard drifted in and out of their daily routine, bringing gifts when he felt guilty and distance when he felt entitled to it. Lucas noticed. Children always did. Mama Lucas once asked when he was 8, watching his father leave early yet again, "Does Dad work so much because he likes it? Or because he doesn't like being here?" Evelyn had paused, then her hand tightening around the dish towel. She chose her words carefully. "Your father works hard so we can have a good life," she said. It was the safest answer, not necessarily the truest. Years passed in that quiet compromise. Evelyn became skilled at reading moods, smoothing tensions before they erupted, making sure nothing disrupted the image Richard cared so deeply about. At corporate events, she stood slightly behind him, offering polite smiles, never correcting him when he subtly took credit for ideas that had begun at their own dinner table. No one asked what she did with her time, and eventually no one expected her to do anything at all. That was the unspoken rule of their marriage, Richard shone. Evelyn supported, Lucas adapted. Still, Evelyn believed in loyalty. She believed that consistency mattered. That love, when proven over time, would eventually be recognized. She believed that if she held everything together long enough, it would count for something. So when the unexpected happened, the phone call that shattered her routine, her first instinct was not excitement, but disbelief. She had entered the lottery almost absent-mindedly. A ticket purchased during a grocery run. Lucas tugging at her sleeve, asking for cereal she never bought. She barely remembered the numbers she chose. When the representative confirmed the amount, Evelyn had asked them to repeat it 3 times, certain there had been a mistake. $80 million. The figure felt unreal, like a headline meant for someone else. She sat at the kitchen table so long after the call ended, staring at the wall, her pulse steady but her thoughts racing. This wasn't just money. This was margin, leverage, space to breathe. And without hesitation, her first thought was Richard. He would finally see her differently, she believed. This wasn't about proving anything she didn't think in those terms. But surely this changed the balance. Surely this meant she was no longer invisible. She imagined his reaction. Surprise, maybe pride, perhaps gratitude. She pictured them standing together, equals, for the first time in years. Lucas had noticed her shaking hands. "Did something bad happen?" he asked quietly. Evelyn knelt in front of him, forcing a smile that trembled despite her effort. "No, sweetheart. Something unexpected happened." That afternoon, she dressed with more care than usual, not out of vanity, but intention. She chose neutral colors, nothing flashy. She wanted to bring the news with dignity, not drama. Lucas insisted on coming with her, sensing that this moment mattered. The drive to Richard's office felt strangely ceremonial. Evelyn rehearsed her words, discarding each version as inadequate. How did you announce a miracle without sounding naive? How did you share a victory when you had spent years pretending not to need one? When they arrived, the building's glass facade reflected her image back at her. For a fleeting second, she didn't recognize herself. She looked composed, capable, someone who belonged in places like this. The receptionist greeted her politely, though without warmth. Evelyn was used to that. She signed in her name typed neatly into the system, just another formality. Lucas squeezed her hand as they waited for the elevator. "This is Dad's floor," he said softly, as if stating a fact might steady them both. "Yes," Evelyn replied. "It is?" As the elevator rose, she felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not fear, not excitement, but clarity. Whatever happened next, something fundamental had already shifted. The woman who stepped out of that elevator was not the same one who had stepped in. She just didn't know yet how much it would cost her to learn that truth. The news still didn't feel real to Evelyn, even as the elevator doors slid open onto the executive floor. Everything here was designed to impress muted carpet that swallowed footsteps, glass walls etched with subtle patterns, the faint scent of expensive cologne and polished wood. This was Richard's world. A place where voices stayed low, smiles stayed sharp, and power moved quietly from office to office. Lucas tightened his grip on her hand. "You okay, Mom?" he asked. Evelyn nodded. "I'm fine," she said, and this time she meant it. Her heartbeat was steady, her breathing calm. Whatever anxiety she had felt earlier had settled into something else. Anticipation, perhaps, or hope, though she was careful with that word. They walked past framed awards lining the hallways. Evelyn had attended the ceremonies for many of them, sitting in the audience, while Richard accepted applause. She remembered clapping until her palms hurt, smiling even when no one looked back at her. Today felt different. Today she wasn't just arriving as the supportive wife. She was bringing news that changed the equation. At least, that's what she believed. As they approached Richard's office, Evelyn noticed the door was closed. That wasn't unusual. Meetings ran long, calls overlapped. Still, she paused, adjusting the bouquet in her arms. White lilies. Simple, elegant. She had chosen them without thinking, drawn to their quiet strength. She lifted her hand to knock. That was when the sound reached her. At first, it was indistinct, a soft murmur that didn't register as wrong. Then came laughter. Not the polite, restrained kind Richard used with clients, but something looser, intimate, followed by a woman's voice, low and familiar in a way that made Evelyn's stomach tighten. She didn't knock. Lucas shifted beside her. "Dad's talking to someone," he whispered. "Yes," Evelyn said, though she wasn't sure what she was answering. The seconds stretched. The sounds continued, movement, voices too close together to be professional. Evelyn felt a strange detachment wash over her, as if her body understood before her mind was willing to accept it. She leaned closer to the door, not pressing her ear against it, just standing still. She didn't want to hear more. She wanted the sounds to stop, to resolve themselves into something harmless. A misunderstanding, a joke taken out of context. But they didn't stop. Instead, she heard Richard's voice clearly now, warm, playful, a tone she hadn't heard directed at her in years. Something inside her went quiet. Evelyn straightened her hand, lowering slowly from the door. She looked down at Lucas, who was watching her face with growing concern. "Mom," he said, "what's wrong?" She didn't answer immediately. She was suddenly aware of everything. The hum of the air conditioning, the distant ring of a phone, the way the bouquet trembled slightly in her grasp. In that moment, she understood something with unsettling clarity. Whatever waited behind that door was not a mistake. It was a choice. One made repeatedly, deliberately in spaces she had helped protect. She placed the flowers gently on a nearby table. "Stay right here," she said softly to Lucas. Her voice didn't shake. "I need to check something." Before he could respond, she turned the handle and opened the door. The scene inside didn't rush at her. It revealed itself slowly, cruelly. Richard stood near his desk, his jacket draped over a chair, his posture relaxed in a way that felt unfamiliar now that Evelyn saw it clearly. A woman stood close to him, and too close, her hand resting casually against the edge of the desk, as if she belonged there. Both of them froze. For a fraction of a second, no one spoke. Then Richard's expression changed. Not to guilt, not to shame, to irritation. "Evelyn," he said, his tone flat, "you're not supposed to be here." The woman. Vanessa glanced between them, her lips curving slightly, more amused than embarrassed. She didn't move away. Lucas stepped into the doorway behind his mother. Richard's eyes flicked to his son, then back to Evelyn. His jaw tightened. "This is a bad time," he said. Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him, as if she were seeing his face for the first time. The lines around his eyes, the practiced calm, the absence of surprise. "You didn't answer your phone," she said quietly. "I was busy," Richard replied. Clearly. There it was. No apology, no explanation, just annoyance. Vanessa shifted her weight, folding her arms. "I can step out if you want," she said, though her tone suggested she had no intention of doing so. Richard waved a dismissive hand. "No, it's fine, fine." Evelyn felt Lucas press closer to her side. She placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding herself in the familiar warmth of her child. She had imagined this moment differently, had pictured Richard's face lighting up with surprise when she shared her news, had rehearsed the words in her head during the drive. All of that felt distant now, irrelevant. "I came to tell you something," Evelyn said. Her voice was steady, almost calm. "But I can see this isn't the right moment." Richard exhaled sharply. "Evelyn, don't do this here. We can talk later. Later." The word carried an assumption that she would comply, retreat, wait her turn, as she always had. She met his gaze. "No," she said. "I don't think we will." That caught his attention. For the first time, Richard looked uncertain. Vanessa glanced at him, her expression shifting. "Is there a problem?" she asked. Evelyn didn't answer her. She wasn't worth the energy. She reached for the door, guiding Lucas back into the hallway. Before stepping out, she turned once more. "I won't interrupt your day," she said to Richard. "But don't worry. You'll hear from me." He scoffed. "About what?" Evelyn paused just long enough for the question to linger unanswered. Then she closed the door. In the hallway, the air felt heavier. Lucas looked up at her, his eyes wide, searching. "Mom," he whispered. "Who was that?" Evelyn crouched down in front of him, meeting his gaze. She chose her words carefully, the way she always had when life demanded honesty without cruelty. "That was someone your father made a choice to bring into our lives," she said, without asking. Lucas frowned. Are we?" She placed her hands on his cheeks gently. "We are okay," she said. And this time, it wasn't reassurance, it was a decision. As they walked back toward the elevator, Evelyn felt something solidify inside her. The shock had passed. The hurt was there, yes, but beneath it lay something stronger, awareness. Richard had just shown her who he was when the truth stood in front of him. And without realizing it, he had also shown her exactly how much he underestimated her. The elevator ride down was silent. Lucas stood close to Evelyn, his small fingers wrapped tightly around hers. The cheerful chime that usually marked each passing floor sounded out of place, now almost mocking. Evelyn kept her gaze forward, her expression composed, but inside, everything was rearranging itself with ruthless precision. She did not cry. Not then. She had learned long ago that tears once shown became weapons in the wrong hands. When the doors opened onto the lobby, sunlight streamed through the glass walls, warm and indifferent. People moved around them, assistants, executives, visitors, each absorbed in their own purpose. No one noticed the quiet fracture that had just split Evelyn's life in two. They stepped outside. The city noise rushed in sharp and alive. Lucas finally spoke. Dad didn't look surprised. Evelyn paused. She looked down at her son, really looked at him. He wasn't confused in the way children often were. He was observing, processing. No, she said honestly. He didn't. Does that mean he's been doing that for a long time? Evelyn inhaled slowly. She would not lie to him, not now. It means, she said carefully, that sometimes adults make choices they think won't have consequences. Lucas frowned. But everything has consequences. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. Yes, she said, it does. The drive home passed in a blur. Evelyn focused on the road, on the red lights, and turns anchoring herself in routine. Her phone buzzed twice. She didn't look. She already knew who it was. When they reached the house, Lucas headed inside without being asked, retreating to his room with the quiet understanding of a child who knew space was needed. Evelyn stood alone in the driveway for a moment, the afternoon sun warming her face. This house, this life, she had protected it fiercely. Inside, she set her purse down with deliberate care. She moved through the kitchen, the living room, touching nothing unnecessarily, as if she were seeing it all for the first time. The framed photos on the wall caught her attention. Family vacations, forced smiles, Richard always positioned slightly forward, always the focal point. She reached up and turned one frame face down, then another, not in anger, in clarity. Oh. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she answered. What, she said calmly. Richard didn't waste time. You embarrassed me. The audacity of it almost made her laugh. I walked in on you, she replied. You embarrassed yourself. There was a brief pause on the other end. She could picture him, jaw-clenched eyes, calculating, already shifting blame into position. You had no right to bring Lucas into that, he said sharply. Evelyn leaned against the counter. I didn't bring him into anything. You did. That woman is a colleague, Richard snapped. This is being blown out of proportion. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. Not because she was overwhelmed, but because she was done listening. Don't insult me, she said quietly. And don't pretend this is new. Another pause. Longer this time. What do you want? He asked. There it was. Not, are you okay? Not, we need to talk. Just a transaction. I want space, Evelyn said. And I want you to leave. Richard scoffed. This is my house. No, she corrected him. It's our house. And tonight I need you out of it. You can't just decide that, he said. You're being emotional. Evelyn straightened. Her voice did not rise. I'm being clear, she said. You can stay elsewhere tonight. We'll talk later when lawyers are present. Silence fell between them, heavy, charged. You're overreacting, Richard finally said. Evelyn ended the call. Her hands trembled then, not from fear, but from the effort of restraint. She placed them flat on the counter until the sensation passed. That evening, she cooked dinner. Simple, familiar. Lucas ate quietly, glancing at her occasionally, as if checking that she was still there. Is Dad coming home? He asked. No, Evelyn said. Not tonight. Okay, he replied, accepting it with a maturity that made her chest tighten. After Lucas went to bed, Evelyn sat alone in the living room. The house felt different now, larger, quieter, unclaimed. Her phone lay on the table untouched. Messages continued to arrive. She didn't read them. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out the folded document she had tucked away earlier that day. The confirmation letter. She read it again, slowly. $80 million. Her name. Only her name. For the first time since leaving Richard's office, emotion crept in. Not grief, not rage, but something unexpected. Relief. Not because of the money itself, but because of what it represented. Independence. Options. Proof that her life did not end at the edge of his approval. She thought back to the moment in the hallway, the sound behind the door, the instant her excitement had collapsed into silence. She realized now that what had stopped her cold wasn't the betrayal itself. It was recognition. She had been standing outside that door for years. Richard came home late that night. Evelyn heard the garage door, the soft click of keys. She didn't move. He entered the living room, his presence filling the space, like it always had expectant dominant. "We need to talk," he said. Evelyn didn't look at him. "No," she replied. "We need to sleep. You can't shut me out," he said. She turned then, meeting his eyes. There was no pleading there, no confusion, just resolve. "I can," she said, "and I am." Richard stared at her, as if waiting for the woman he knew to reappear, the one who softened, who adjusted, who absorbed. She didn't. "This doesn't have to be ugly," he said carefully. Evelyn nodded. "That depends entirely on you." He studied her for a long moment, unsettled. Something had shifted. He felt it even if he didn't yet understand it. "I'll take the guest room," he muttered. Evelyn watched him walk away. She didn't follow. She didn't call after him. That night, alone in her bed, Evelyn stared at the ceiling. The hurt came in waves now, quiet, controlled, manageable. But beneath it, something stronger had taken root. She was no longer reacting. She was deciding. And though Richard believed this was merely a temporary disruption, another conflict she would smooth over, Evelyn knew better. The woman who had walked into his office that afternoon had left something behind. The woman lying awake now was someone else entirely. Morning arrived without mercy. Evelyn woke before dawn, not because she had rested well, but because her mind refused to pretend anything was normal. The house was still the air cool, and for a few quiet minutes, she let herself exist in that silence. No footsteps from Richard. No phone buzzing with his demands. No pressure to perform calm for anyone else. Then she heard Lucas's door open. Soft steps padded down the hallway. He appeared in the kitchen doorway in pajama pants and a hoodie, hair slightly mussed, eyes heavy but alert. "You're up," he said. Evelyn managed a small smile. "So are you." He hesitated, then crossed the room and sat at the table watching her as she filled the kettle. He didn't ask where his father was. He already knew. "What happens now?" Lucas asked finally. Evelyn held the kettle under the faucet, letting the sound of running water buy her a second. Children deserved truth, but not burdens they couldn't carry. "What happens now," she said, "is we take care of ourselves. One step at a time." Lucas nodded slowly. "Like when you taught me to ride a bike." Evelyn paused. The memento flashed, Lucas wobbling, falling, scraping his knee, ready to quit. Evelyn had knelt beside him, cleaned the wound, and said firmly, "You can stop if you want, but don't stop because you're scared." "Yes," she said, exactly like that. When Richard finally emerged, he looked as if nothing had happened. He was dressed for work, crisp shirt cufflinks, the controlled face he wore in public. He moved through the kitchen with the confidence of someone who believed he could reset the tone simply by acting as though he owned it. "Morning," he said to Lucas, voice smooth. Lucas didn't answer. He looked down at the table. Richard's attention shifted to Evelyn. "We should talk privately," he said. Evelyn poured tea into 2 mugs, one for herself, one for Lucas, then turned to Richard with quiet steadiness. "There's nothing to discuss this morning," she said. "Lucas has school. I have things to do." Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "Evelyn, don't turn this into a scene." She kept her voice low. "A scene happened yesterday. I'm simply refusing to perform today." Lucas's shoulders stiffened, but he didn't look up. Richard took a breath, as if reminding himself to remain calm. "I'll call you later," he said, already shifting into control. "We'll straighten this out." Evelyn didn't respond. She focused on Lucas. After Richard left, the house felt lighter, less tense, less crowded. Evelyn drove Lucas to school herself, her hand steady on the wheel. At the drop-off line, Lucas unbuckled and paused before opening the door. "Mom," he said quietly, "are you leaving Dad?" Evelyn looked at him, her chest tightening. There was no fear in his eyes, only a need for certainty. "I'm leaving what hurts us," she said, "and I'm choosing what keeps us safe." Lucas swallowed. "Okay." He stepped out of the car, then turned back. "I love you," he said quickly, as if the words were urgent. Evelyn's voice softened. "I love you too, more than anything." When he walked away, Evelyn stayed parked for a moment, watching him disappear into the building. Then she exhaled, slow-controlled, and pulled out her phone. She didn't call Richard. She didn't call a friend. She called a number she hadn't used in years. Daniel Brooks's office, a receptionist, answered. "This is Evelyn Carter," Evelyn said. "I need an appointment." There was a pause, then a shift in tone. "Yes, ma'am." "When can you come in today?" Evelyn replied. 2 hours later, she sat in a law office that smelled like leather and paper solid, grounded built for people who wanted truth more than comfort. Daniel Brooks entered with calm efficiency, silver hair, neatly combed glasses perched low on his nose. He didn't smile unnecessarily. He didn't offer sympathy as decoration. He shook her hand once. "Mrs. Carter," he said. "Tell me what happened," Evelyn told him. Not with dramatic emphasis, not with emotional flourish, just facts. The office, the sounds, the woman, Richard's reaction, the way Lucas had been forced to witness it. Daniel listened without interruption. When she finished, he folded his hands. "Do you want a divorce?" he asked plainly. Evelyn held his gaze. "Yes." "Do you want revenge?" he asked, next, equally plain. Evelyn blinked once. The question wasn't inappropriate, it was honest. Many people confuse the two. "I want justice," she said. "I want what's fair, and I want him to stop believing he can treat me like I'm nothing." Daniel nodded slightly, as if he respected the distinction. "Good. That mindset will protect you." He reached for a file folder. "Now tell me about your finances." Evelyn hesitated, then took out the lottery confirmation letter and slid it across the desk. Daniel opened it, scanned it, and his expression barely changed, except for a subtle tightening around his eyes, the look of a man recognizing leverage. "This is in your name only?" he asked. "Yes," Evelyn said. "I never added him. I haven't told him yet." Daniel leaned back. "That he said was your first smart move." Evelyn's lips pressed together. "It wasn't strategy. I didn't get the chance." Daniel's gaze stayed steady. Sometimes instinct knows what the heart hasn't accepted yet. He began outlining realities, property, custody accounts, exposure. Evelyn listened, absorbing each point. It wasn't comforting, but it was stabilizing. For the first time, she could see the shape of a path forward. Then Daniel asked, "Is your husband's company publicly traded?" "Yes." Evelyn answered. "He's the CEO." "Then we need to be careful," Daniel said. "Because if he finds out you have that money, he may try to move quickly, freeze assets, shift accounts, pressure you into signing something." Evelyn nodded. "That sounds like him." Daniel slid a notepad toward her. "We're going to protect you first, quietly. No announcements, no threats, no emotional confrontations." Evelyn's voice was calm. "That's already what I'm doing." Daniel looked at her for a moment, then nodded again. "Good," he continued. "You'll open a separate account in your name only. You'll secure your documents, passport, birth certificates, property deeds, anything important. And I want you to write down everything you remember from yesterday, times, names, details. We treat truth like evidence, not like a story." Evelyn felt something settle inside her. Evidence. That word made the situation real in a way her pain hadn't. Also, Daniel added, "We'll need to understand your husband's patterns, not just emotionally, financially." Evelyn frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Daniel didn't answer directly. he asked. Has Richard ever insisted you sign things you didn't fully read? Evelyn's mind flickered back papers placed in front of her at the kitchen table, Richard tapping his pen, saying, "It's just a formality." She had signed because she trusted him, because she didn't want conflict. Yes, she admitted. Daniel's face remained composed, but his voice sharpened by half a degree. That matters, because men who betray at home often betray elsewhere too. Evelyn left the office with a thin folder of instructions and a heavier, clearer understanding of the battlefield she had stepped into. The sky outside was bright, the world moving as usual, but she felt altered, like she had crossed a line she could never uncross. Her phone buzzed as she walked to her car. Richard. She didn't answer. He called again. She let it ring. Then a text appeared. "We need to handle this like adults. Stop ignoring me." Evelyn stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back only 5 words. "All communication goes through counsel." She sent it, put the phone away, got into her car, and for the first time, she felt something that had nothing to do with money. Power, not loud, not angry. Quiet, unavoidable. Richard did not take the message well. By noon, Evelyn's phone had filled with missed calls, some restrained, some insistent, each one escalating in tone. When that failed, emails followed. Long paragraphs framed as concern, then frustration, then thinly veiled threats disguised as reason. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Think about Lucas. You don't know how things work out here." Evelyn read none of them past the subject line. She had learned something important the day before. Responding emotionally only fed Richard's sense of control. Silence, on the other hand, unsettled him. It denied him the reaction he relied on. That afternoon, she returned home to find the house subtly altered. Drawers disturbed, a file cabinet slightly ajar. Richard hadn't taken much, just enough to remind her that he still believed he had access. She stood in the doorway of the study, scanning the room with calm precision. Nothing essential was missing. She had followed Daniel's instructions early that morning, moving her most important documents to a secure location Richard didn't know existed. Still, the violation lingered. This was not a man trying to fix his marriage. This was a man preparing for a fight. When Richard came home that evening, he didn't bother with politeness. "You hired a lawyer," he said, not a question. Evelyn continued setting the table, placing forks and knives with deliberate care. "Yes. You blindsided me," he snapped. She met his eyes. "You betrayed me." "This is a response, not an ambush," Richard scoffed. "You're acting like I committed a crime." "You committed a choice," Evelyn replied evenly. "And now you're facing its consequences." He paced the room, frustration leaking through his practiced composure. "This doesn't have to go this way. We can keep things civilized." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. Civilized would have been honesty. Richard stopped pacing. "What do you want?" he demanded again. The question echoed the one he had asked the day before. Evelyn recognized it now, not curiosity, but negotiation. "I want transparency," she said. "I want respect. And I want you to stop pretending this is something you can manage." Richard laughed humorlessly. "You think you have leverage?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She watched him carefully, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his confidence faltered when he couldn't predict her reaction. "I think," she said at last, "that you've underestimated me for a very long time." Richard's eyes hardened. "Don't make this ugly." Evelyn's voice remained calm. "You don't get to decide that anymore." The conversation ended there, not with resolution, but with a clear shift in power. Richard retreated to the guest room that night, slamming the door hard enough for Lucas to hear. Evelyn went to her son's room immediately. Lucas sat on his bed, headphones around his neck, eyes fixed on the floor. "Is he mad?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Evelyn said honestly. "But that's not your responsibility." Lucas nodded. "Is he mad at you?" Evelyn sat beside him. "He's mad because things aren't going his way." Lucas considered that. "That happens to people sometimes." Evelyn smiled faintly. It does. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house shifted from tense to transactional. Richard spoke only when necessary, his words clipped and strategic. Evelyn responded only when required, never volunteering information, never filling silence. Behind the scenes, she worked. She met with a financial advisor Daniel recommended Thomas Reed, a man who spoke softly but asked precise questions. He reviewed her accounts, her assets, her exposure. "You're in a stronger position than you realize," Thomas told her, "but discretion will be critical." Evelyn nodded. "I don't want to make noise." Thomas's lips curved slightly. "Good. Noise alerts predators." Meanwhile, Richard began changing tactics. Flowers arrived one afternoon, lavish, unnecessary. Evelyn had them returned unopened. A message followed. "I'm trying to fix this." She didn't reply. Then came the pivot. Richard stopped pushing for reconciliation and started positioning himself as the victim. He spoke loudly on the phone in shared spaces, mentioning stress betrayal, sudden changes. He let Lucas overhear just enough to plant confusion. Evelyn addressed it immediately. She sat Lucas down at the kitchen table, her voice steady. "Your father is hurting," she said. "But hurting doesn't give someone permission to rewrite the truth." Lucas looked up. "Is he lying?" Evelyn paused. "He's telling a version that protects himself." Lucas absorbed that quietly. One evening, Richard crossed a line he couldn't step back from. He slid a folder across the table toward Evelyn. "Sign this," he said. She didn't touch it. "What is it?" "A temporary agreement," he replied. "Just until things settle. It keeps everything balanced." Evelyn opened the folder and scanned the pages. Her expression didn't change, but something inside her cooled further. "This limits my access to our accounts," she said, "and restricts where Lucas can stay. It's standard," Richard insisted. "You don't understand how these things work." Evelyn closed the folder. "I understand exactly how this works." She stood. "I won't be signing anything without my attorney reviewing it." Richard's mask cracked. "You're being difficult on purpose." "No," she said. "I'm being careful on purpose." That night, Richard didn't hide his anger. Doors slammed. Words were muttered just loud enough to bruise. Evelyn slept lightly, aware of every sound, every shift in the house. But beneath the vigilance, she felt something steady, an internal anchor that hadn't been there before. This was no longer about saving a marriage. It was about protecting a future. The following morning, Daniel called. "Richard contacted me," he said. "He's eager." Evelyn exhaled slowly. "That means he's scared." "Yes," Daniel agreed. "And scared men make mistakes." Evelyn looked out the window at the quiet street, the world moving on, as if nothing had changed. Then she said, "We let him." Evelyn learned quickly that silence was not emptiness, it was pressure. The house had become a shared space in name only. Mornings were choreographed to avoid overlap. Richard left early. Evelyn adjusted her schedule so Lucas never had to choose between them at the breakfast table. Dinners were eaten separately. The television stayed off. There were no arguments, no shouting matches, no dramatic confrontations for Richard to point at and call instability. That was what unsettled him most. He had expected tears, accusations, a plea to fix things. Instead, he was met with calm logistics and an emotional distance that denied him oxygen. Evelyn used the quiet to observe. She noticed the way Richard began taking calls in the garage instead of the living room. The way his laptop never left his side. The way he flinched just slightly whenever mail arrived addressed to Evelyn alone. Fear, she realized, had a rhythm. One afternoon, as Evelyn sorted through old files in the study, she found something she had overlooked for years. Copies of documents Richard had asked her to sign long ago. Partnership agreements, tax-related authorizations, forms she had trusted him enough not to question. She didn't panic. She photographed each page carefully and forwarded them to Daniel. Daniel's response came an hour later. "These are interesting. We'll talk." That night, Richard tried a new approach. He waited until Lucas was asleep before sitting across from Evelyn at the dining table. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He softened his tone in a way that once would have pulled her back into orbit. "I don't recognize you," he said quietly. "You've changed." Evelyn met his gaze without blinking. "No, I've stopped adapting." He leaned forward. "You're tearing this family apart." She folded her hands. "Families don't break because someone tells the truth. They break because someone lived a lie." Richard sighed, rubbing his temples. "This doesn't have to end like this." "End," Evelyn echoed. "You ended it already. I'm just responding with clarity." His eyes hardened. "You think you're smarter than me?" Now Evelyn paused. Not because she was afraid of the question, but because she wanted to answer it precisely. "I think intelligence isn't measured by how loud you are," she said. "It's measured by how prepared you are when the noise stops." Richard pushed back from the table. "You're making a mistake." Evelyn stood as well. "So did you." He left the room without another word. The next morning, Daniel called again earlier this time. "I need you to listen carefully," he said. "Do not confront your husband about anything I'm about to tell you." Evelyn's grip tightened on the phone. "Okay." "There are inconsistencies in the paperwork you sent," Daniel continued. "Nothing conclusive yet, but enough to suggest your husband hasn't been entirely honest financially." Evelyn closed her eyes, not in shock but in recognition. The thought had been forming for days, hovering at the edge of certainty. "What do I do?" she asked. "Nothing," Daniel replied. "You let him move first." That afternoon, Evelyn received an email from Richard's assistant, Margaret Hill. Subject, quick question, and Margaret had worked with Richard for over a decade. Efficient, loyal, invisible in the way women like her often were. The message was brief. "Evelyn, I hope you're well. I wasn't sure who else to ask. Could we speak privately?" Evelyn stared at the screen for a long moment before replying, "Yes. When is convenient for you?" They met at a small cafe 2 days later, tucked away from the business district. Margaret arrived early, her posture tense, her coffee untouched. "I shouldn't be here," she said immediately. Evelyn nodded. "Then don't be. You can leave." Margaret hesitated, then stayed seated. "I've worked for Richard a long time," she said. "I've seen things." Evelyn didn't interrupt. "He's been careful," Margaret continued. "But lately he's rushed. And when people rush, they make mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" Evelyn asked calmly. Margaret swallowed. "Moving money, signing things without proper review, pressuring people to keep quiet." Evelyn felt no surge of triumph, only confirmation. "Why tell me?" she asked. Margaret looked down at her hands. "Because I watched him treat you like you didn't exist. And I watched him panic when you stopped responding." Evelyn let that settle. "I don't want revenge," Margaret added quickly. I don't want to be complicit anymore." Evelyn nodded once. "Then don't be." She didn't ask Margaret for documents. She didn't ask for secrets. She didn't need to. The conversation itself was enough. Richard was unraveling. At home, the tension escalated quietly. Richard began staying out late. When he was home, he hovered watching Evelyn with suspicion, as if trying to read a language he no longer understood. One evening, Lucas approached Evelyn in the kitchen. "Dad asked me a weird question," he said. Evelyn turned alert but calm. "What did he ask?" "He asked if you were mad at him," Lucas said. "Like, really mad." Evelyn knelt to Lucas's level. "What did you say?" "I said you weren't mad," Lucas replied. "You were just serious." Evelyn smiled gently. That was a good answer. "Is he scared?" Lucas asked. Evelyn considered the question carefully. "I think she said he's realizing that when someone stops arguing, it means they've started deciding." Lucas nodded slowly, absorbing the idea. That night, Evelyn lay awake staring at the ceiling. The hurt still surfaced at unexpected moments. A laugh remembered a promise broken. But it no longer controlled her. She thought of the woman she had been, the one who filled silence with effort, who smoothed over discomfort to keep peace. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone quieter, stronger, someone who understood that power didn't need to announce itself. Down the hall, a door creaked. Footsteps paused outside her room, then retreated. Richard, she realized, was afraid to knock. And for the first time since the betrayal, Evelyn felt something close to peace. Not because justice had arrived, but because it was finally on its way. Evelyn began to understand just how much Richard had relied on her invisibility. For years, her silence had been mistaken for absence. Her presence reduced to logistics, her mind to compliance. Now that she had withdrawn from that role, the machinery of Richard's world began to grind unevenly. It started with small things. A package arrived, addressed to Evelyn alone. Richard stared at it as if it were a threat. He didn't ask what it was. He didn't touch it. He simply watched as she carried it upstairs and locked it in her bedroom closet. Then came the calendar notifications, appointments that were hers, not his. Meetings that required discretion. Phone calls she took outside, returning with the same calm expression she always wore, giving him nothing to react to. He had no idea what she was doing, and that terrified him. Evelyn, meanwhile, was rediscovering parts of herself that had been packed away carefully over the years. Skills she had learned before marriage, instincts she had dulled to keep peace. A capacity for strategic thinking that had never disappeared, only been redirected towards supporting someone else. She spent her mornings with Thomas Reed reviewing investments, discussing risk mapping, long-term stability. She absorbed information, quickly asking precise questions, listening more than she spoke. "You've done this before," Thomas observed one afternoon. Evelyn didn't correct him. "I've always done this," she said, "just not for myself." In the afternoons, she worked through old records, emails, notes, timelines, not obsessively, methodically. She wasn't searching for a smoking gun. She was building context. Patterns mattered more than proof at this stage. Richard sensed the shift and responded the only way he knew how, by tightening control. He began dropping comments in passing about lawyers being expensive, about reputations being fragile, about how divorce could ruin everything. He framed them as concern, but the intent was clear. One evening, he cornered Evelyn in the hallway. "You know," he said lightly, "people are starting to ask questions." Evelyn didn't stop walking. "People always do. They're wondering what you're planning," he continued. "You've been, busy." Evelyn turned to face him then, not with anger, with curiosity. "Are you worried?" she asked. Richard hesitated just long enough. "No," he said too quickly. "I'm trying to protect us." Evelyn nodded. "Then you should probably stop threatening me." His expression hardened. "I'm not threatening you." She met his gaze. "Then we understand each other." That night, Richard didn't sleep. Evelyn knew because she heard him pacing long after midnight, the floorboards creaking under restless steps. She lay still, eyes open, listening not to his movement, but to her own calm breathing. Fear no longer lived there. The next day, Daniel called with an update. "We've uncovered discrepancies," he said. "Not enough to accuse, but enough to prepare." "Prepare how?" Evelyn asked. "By positioning you where you can't be cornered," Daniel replied. "And by letting him believe he still has time." Evelyn understood immediately. Richard's greatest weakness was not greed or pride, it was impatience. That afternoon, she received another message from Margaret Hill. "He's rushing things," it read. "Moving meetings forward, canceling others. He asked me to destroy a draft document yesterday." Evelyn stared at the words, then typed back only one sentence. "Do not do anything you're uncomfortable with," Margaret responded minutes later. "I won't." Evelyn set the phone down, her thoughts steady. She wasn't directing anyone. She wasn't pulling strings. She was simply allowing truth to surface at its own pace. At dinner that evening, Lucas watched his parents carefully, as if sensing an invisible tension beneath the silence. "Dad," he said suddenly, "are you moving out?" Richard froze fork halfway to his mouth. "Why would you ask that?" he replied, forcing a smile. Lucas shrugged. "You're never here. And when you are, you look like you're about to leave." Evelyn waited. This wasn't her moment to intervene. Richard laughed awkwardly. "I'm just busy." Lucas nodded. "Mom's busy too. But she still eats with me." The comment landed harder than any accusation. Richard's jaw tightened. "Finish your dinner," Lucas did quietly. Later, Evelyn tucked her son into bed. "Did I say something bad?" Lucas asked. Evelyn brushed his hair back gently. "You told the truth. That's not bad. Is Dad going to be mad?" Evelyn considered the question carefully. "Your father is responsible for his own feelings," she said, "not you." Lucas seemed to accept that. As she closed his door, Evelyn felt a familiar ache, grief for the family she had believed in. But it was softer now, less sharp. It didn't control her. In the days that followed, Richard's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He oscillated between charm and hostility, alternating apologies with accusations. He began staying out later, drinking more, making calls he thought Evelyn couldn't hear. But she heard everything. One evening, while Richard showered, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Evelyn didn't touch it. She didn't need to. Moments later, he rushed in, snatching it up, his face tight. "Who was that?" she asked casually. "No one," he snapped. Evelyn nodded. "Of course." That was when she realized something important. Richard wasn't just afraid of losing her. He was afraid of losing control of a story he had been rewriting for years. And the more she stayed silent, the more space he had to fill with mistakes. The final confirmation came at the end of the week. Daniel called again. "He's preparing something," he said. "We don't know exactly what yet. But he's trying to move first." Evelyn looked out the window at the quiet street children riding bikes, neighbors walking dogs, the world oblivious. "Then we let him," she said. Daniel paused. "You're very calm." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I've already survived the worst part." "What was that?" he asked. "Realizing I was alone long before he betrayed me," she replied. That night, Evelyn packed a small bag, not to leave, but to be ready. She placed it in the trunk of her car, along with copies of documents, a spare phone, and Lucas's favorite jacket. Preparation was not fear. It was respect for reality. As she stood in the garage, the lights dim around her, Evelyn felt something settle into place. Richard believed he was still ahead of her. He was wrong. She wasn't chasing him. She was waiting for the moment he exposed himself, fully believing no one was watching. And when that moment came, Evelyn would be ready. The meeting was not accidental. Evelyn knew that the cafe Daniel chose sat just far enough from Richard's usual territory to avoid coincidence, yet close enough to feel deliberate. She arrived early, ordered tea, and took the seat with her back to the wall, a habit she hadn't realized she'd developed until recently. Daniel arrived precisely on time. He didn't waste words. He made his first move, he said, sitting down. Evelyn's posture didn't change. "What kind paperwork?" Daniel replied. "Subtle, time-sensitive, designed to look harmless." He slid a thin folder across the table. Evelyn opened it slowly, scanning the pages. The language was dense but familiar: temporary restructuring, asset consolidation, discretionary authority. The kind of document people signed when they trusted the person placing it in front of them. "He's attempting to reposition marital assets under business protections," Daniel continued. "If you had signed anything he gave you earlier, this would have been easier for him." Evelyn closed the folder. "But I didn't." "No," Daniel agreed. "And that changed everything." She sipped her tea, letting the warmth steady her. "What happens now?" Daniel leaned back. "Now we do nothing visible, and we prepare something invisible." He explained the plan, not as a trap, but as a mirror. Richard would be allowed to proceed to believe he was ahead to continue documenting his own intent through haste and overreach. The law didn't require a dramatic confrontation. It required timing. "You'll likely be approached again," Daniel said. "He'll frame it as compromise. He may even apologize." Evelyn nodded. "He's already rehearsing." Daniel studied her. "You don't sound angry." "I'm not." Evelyn replied, "I'm alert." That afternoon, she drove to pick up Lucas from school. The routine grounded her, the familiar route. The slow crawl of cars, the cluster of children spilling onto the sidewalk. Lucas climbed into the passenger seat, backpack thudding against the door. "Dad didn't come," he said. Evelyn kept her eyes on the road. I know. Lucas hesitated. He said he had a meeting. Evelyn nodded. He probably did. There was a pause, then Lucas spoke again. Mom, if people do something wrong for a long time, do they forget it's wrong? Evelyn considered the question carefully. I think she said some people confuse getting away with something for being right. Lucas leaned back in his seat, absorbing that. That evening, Richard came home unusually early. He moved through the house with exaggerated calm, as if performing a role he believed Evelyn expected. He even helped set the table, something he hadn't done in years. We should talk, he said, voice measured. Evelyn didn't refuse. She sat across from him, hands folded, expression neutral. I've been thinking, Richard began. About us, about how things escalated. She waited. I don't want this to become a war, he continued. That won't help Lucas. Evelyn nodded. I agree. Relief flickered across his face too quickly. So let's agree to keep this private, he said. No lawyers tearing everything apart. We can handle things internally. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. Internally favors the person who controls the system. Richard's jaw tightened. I'm offering peace. You're offering quiet, Evelyn replied. Those aren't the same thing. He sighed, leaning forward. You're making this complicated. Evelyn met his eyes. I didn't start the complication. I'm responding to it. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out another folder. This is fair, he said. Just review it. Evelyn took the folder but didn't open it. I'll have my attorney look at it. Richard stiffened. You don't trust me. Evelyn's voice was calm. Trust is built on consistency. Silence settled between them. Finally, Richard stood. I'm going out. Evelyn nodded. Drive safely. He paused at the doorway, clearly waiting for something, a question, a plea, a reaction. When none came, he left. That night, Evelyn received a message from Margaret. He's panicking, it read. He asked if I'd stay late tomorrow, said he needs files revised. Evelyn typed back carefully. Only do what's within your role. Protect yourself, Margaret responded with a single word. Thank you. The next morning, Evelyn met Thomas Reed again. They reviewed contingencies, discussed timelines, prepared for volatility. Thomas was pragmatic, unemotional. Markets respond to instability, he said. So do people. Evelyn nodded. I'm not trying to control the outcome. I'm trying to survive it intact. Thomas smiled faintly. You're doing more than surviving. That afternoon, a courier delivered documents to the house official sealed. Richard opened them before Evelyn could stop him. His face drained of color as he read. What is this? He demanded. Evelyn glanced at the envelope. My attorney requested disclosures. You went behind my back, Richard snapped. Evelyn met his anger with stillness. There is no behind anymore. He paced the room, agitation radiating off him. You think you've won something? Evelyn watched him carefully. I think you're revealing yourself. Richard laughed sharply. You don't even know what you're stepping into. Evelyn stood, then stopped pushing. He stared at her chest rising and falling. For a moment she saw something raw beneath the arrogance, fear stripped of polish. This isn't over, he said. Evelyn's voice was steady. I know. That night she couldn't sleep, not from anxiety, but from anticipation. The pieces were moving now, not chaotically, but inevitably. She stood by the window, watching headlights pass on the street below, thinking of the woman she had been, the one who believed stability came from endurance. She understood now that stability came from boundaries. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from Daniel. He filed something. Poorly. We're ready. Evelyn closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. The noise was coming, and this time she would not be standing outside the door, listening. She would be inside the room, fully aware, fully prepared, and no longer invisible. The first public crack appeared on a Tuesday morning. Evelyn learned about it the way she learned most things now. Not from Richard, but from silence. breaking in places that had once been loud with certainty. Thomas called first, his voice measured but alert. "There's unusual movement around Richard's company accounts," he said. "Not illegal by itself, but rushed." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. "He's trying to get ahead of something." "Yes," Thomas replied. "And people who rush leave tracks." By noon, Daniel followed up with confirmation. "He filed an amended disclosure late last night," he said. "It contradicts an earlier statement he made. Not dramatically, but enough." "Enough for what Evelyn asked. Enough to establish intent," Daniel said. "And intent is expensive." Evelyn didn't feel triumph. She felt gravity. The situation had crossed from private fracture to institutional consequence. There would be no clean retreat for Richard now. He had chosen momentum over caution. At home, Richard moved like a man trying to outrun his own shadow. He took calls in the backyard, voice low, pacing in tight circles. He ate standing up, barely tasting his food. When he did speak to Evelyn, it was with forced neutrality, professional, clipped, impersonal. That evening, he finally broke the pattern. "You think you're clever," he said, leaning against the kitchen counter. "You think lawyers and paperwork make you powerful." Evelyn rinsed a plate, her movements unhurried. "I think clarity makes people dangerous to lie to." He scoffed. "You don't understand the scale of what you're involved in." Evelyn turned off the faucet and faced him. "I understand enough to know you're afraid." His jaw tightened. "I'm protecting what I built." Evelyn met his gaze steadily. "You didn't build it alone." That landed. Richard's eyes flashed. "Everything I have came from my decisions." Evelyn's voice was calm. "Then stand by them." He didn't answer. He grabbed his jacket and left. Lucas watched the exchange from the hallway. "Is Dad in trouble?" he asked quietly after the door closed. Evelyn knelt beside him. "Your father is facing the consequences of choices he made," she said. "That's not the same as being in danger." Lucas nodded. "You're not scared?" Evelyn considered the statement. "I'm cautious," she said. "There's a difference." The following days unfolded with controlled acceleration. Requests arrived, notices followed. Daniel kept Evelyn informed without overwhelming her. Each update was precise, restrained, grounded in process. "This isn't a spectacle," he reminded her. "It's a sequence." Margaret sent another message late one night. He asked me to backdate something. I refused. Evelyn replied immediately. "You did the right thing. Document the request. Keep copies." A few minutes passed. "I'm glad you're not angry," Margaret wrote. Evelyn paused, then typed. "Anger clouds judgment. You deserve clarity." At the office, Richard's behavior drew attention. Meetings were rescheduled without explanation. He interrupted colleagues. He dismissed concerns too quickly. Confidence, once smooth and calibrated, began to fray at the edges. Evelyn heard none of this directly. She didn't need to. The ripple reached her through changed tones, delayed responses, sudden urgency where none had existed before. One afternoon, Daniel called with a note of restrained satisfaction. He requested an emergency hearing, he said, without proper grounds. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. "Why would he do that?" "Because he believes speed will overwhelm structure," Daniel replied. "It won't." That night, Richard came home unusually quiet. He didn't pace. He didn't provoke. He sat at the dining table long after dinner, staring at nothing. Evelyn passed through the room without comment. "Do you hate me?" he asked suddenly. The question stopped her, not because it hurt, but because it revealed how far he had fallen from certainty. "No," she said after a moment. "I don't." He looked up, searching her face for something. "Then why are you doing this?" Evelyn didn't soften her voice. "I'm not doing anything to you. I'm doing something for myself." Richard exhaled slowly. "You could stop this." Evelyn shook her head. "You could have." He looked away. In the days that followed, the pressure became visible. Articles appeared carefully worded, non-committal, but pointed. Questions were asked during earnings calls. Advisors grew cautious. Distance appeared where loyalty once lived. Evelyn watched from the perimeter, steady and composed. She met Thomas again to finalize protective measures. She met Daniel to review contingencies. She spent evenings with Lucas helping with homework, maintaining routines, reinforcing normalcy. One night, Lucas asked, "Are we moving?" Evelyn smiled gently. "Not yet." "Are we okay?" he asked. Evelyn placed a hand over his. "We are more than okay." The call came on a Friday evening. "It's happening faster than expected," Daniel said. "There's going to be a formal review. His authority will be limited temporarily." Evelyn closed her eyes, absorbing the weight of it. What does that mean for us? "It means he'll lose control of the narrative," Daniel replied. "And when that happens, people talk." That weekend, Richard barely slept. He drifted through the house like a stranger, avoiding Lucas, avoiding Evelyn, avoiding mirrors. The man who had once commanded rooms now hesitated in his own hallway. On Sunday night, he finally packed a bag. "I'll be staying elsewhere," he said flatly. Evelyn nodded. "That's probably wise." He lingered by the door. "You'll regret this." Evelyn met his eyes one last time. "Regret comes from ignoring truth." I stopped doing that. The door closed behind him. Evelyn stood alone in the quiet house, the stillness heavy but clean. She didn't celebrate. She didn't collapse. She simply breathed. The next phase had begun not with noise or vengeance, but with exposure. Richard had believed that money, speed, and confidence could outrun consequence. He was about to learn that the most dangerous opponent was not a woman who screamed, but a woman who prepared, waited, and refused to disappear. And Evelyn Carter was no longer invisible. Richard's absence changed the house in ways Evelyn hadn't anticipated. It wasn't quieter. She had already learned to live in silence. It was clearer. The air felt less charged, less reactive. Mornings flowed without tension. Even the light seemed different, as if the rooms had stopped bracing for conflict. But clarity did not mean safety. Daniel warned her early that this stage was often the most volatile. When someone loses control publicly, he said they often try to reclaim it privately. Evelyn understood. Richard had never handled loss well. He reframed it, redirected it, blamed others until the ground beneath him felt stable again. This time, there was no one left to blame but her. The first attempt came disguised as generosity. A message arrived late one evening, short-measured. "We should meet. Just us. No lawyers. For Lucas." Evelyn read it once, then twice. Then she set the phone down without replying. She had learned the pattern. For Lucas was Richard's favorite shield, his way of wrapping control in concern. The second attempt followed the next day. A mutual acquaintance called voice hesitant, awkward. "I ran into Richard," the woman said. "He's struggling. He said you've been distant, that you're refusing to talk." Evelyn thanked her politely and ended the call. Distance was not refusal. It was a boundary. By midweek, the pressure intensified. An article appeared brief, speculative, careful not to accuse. It mentioned internal restructuring and executive reassessment. Richard's name was present, but only barely. Still, it was enough. He called that night. Evelyn let it go to voicemail. His voice, when she listened later, was calm but brittle. "You wanted attention," he said. "Now you've got it. Are you satisfied?" She deleted the message. The next morning, Lucas found her in the kitchen, staring at the coffee she hadn't touched. "Dad's picture is online," he said quietly. Evelyn looked up. "What picture?" "The one from his company," Lucas replied. "My friend showed me." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Okay." "Is that bad?" Lucas asked. She crossed the room and sat beside him. "It's information," she said. "Information isn't good or bad. It just exists." Lucas seemed to accept that. People at school might talk. Evelyn met his eyes. "If they do, you tell me." That afternoon, Daniel confirmed what Evelyn already sensed. "He's been officially sidelined," he said. "Temporary, but it's public." Evelyn closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. "What's his next move?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "He'll try to rewrite the story. Richard tried exactly that. Within days, he began positioning himself as the wronged party quietly, carefully. He spoke of misunderstandings, of emotional distance, of a wife who had changed suddenly. He hinted at instability without stating it outright. Evelyn recognized the tactic immediately. It was gaslighting by implication. Margaret reached out again, her messages more frequent now. He asked if I thought you were okay. He's telling people you're being influenced, Evelyn replied with restraint. Document everything. Don't engage emotionally. Margaret responded with gratitude. I wish I'd seen this sooner. Evelyn didn't judge her. Hindsight was not a weapon, it was a teacher. The confrontation came sooner than expected. Richard showed up at the house unannounced on a Saturday morning. Evelyn knew it was him before she opened the door. His presence carried a familiar tension, a demand for acknowledgement. Lucas isn't here, she said evenly. I know, Richard replied. That's why I came. She stepped aside, allowing him in. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of refusal. He stood in the living room looking around as if measuring what he'd lost. You've changed things, he said. Yes, Evelyn replied. I have. You've made me look like a villain. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. You've made yourself look exposed. His eyes flashed. You think you're better than me now. She said. I think I'm done pretending. Richard paced. You could still fix this. Publicly support me. Say this was mutual. Say it's private. Evelyn crossed her arms. Why would I lie to protect our son? Richard snapped. Evelyn's voice sharpened just enough. Don't use him. Silence fell. For the first time, Richard looked uncertain, not angry, not arrogant, but unsure of what came next. You don't understand, he said quietly. If I fall, people will look for someone to blame. Evelyn met his gaze. Then tell the truth. He laughed bitterly. You don't get it. Truth doesn't matter. Evelyn's reply was immediate. It does when it's documented. That stopped him. His face paled slightly, going, what does that mean? Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't need to. He left without another word. That night, Daniel called with urgency. He contacted the board directly, Daniel said. Tried to frame you as unstable. It didn't work. Evelyn closed her eyes. Because of the documents. Yes, Daniel replied. Because patterns matter. The following week was relentless. Formal notices, requests for clarification, internal audits expanding scope. Richard's authority narrowed further. He lashed out in private, restrained himself in public. Evelyn stayed steady. She took Lucas to school. She cooked dinner. She attended meetings with Thomas and Daniel. She slept. One evening, Lucas asked, is Dad going to be mad forever? Evelyn considered the question carefully. I don't know, she said honestly, but his feelings are his responsibility. Lucas nodded. I like it when things are quiet. Evelyn smiled faintly. So do I. The final blow didn't come with drama. It came with an email. Daniel forwarded it late one night. They've scheduled a formal vote. He won't survive it. Evelyn sat in the dark living room, the house still around her. She didn't feel relief. She didn't feel triumph. She felt gravity. Richard had crossed every line available to him. And now the consequences were no longer hers to carry. The next morning, headlines appeared measured, restrained, devastating in their calm. Richard Carter was officially removed. Evelyn turned off the television. She stood by the window, watching the street wake up children walking to school life. Continuing. She thought of the woman she had been, the one who stayed quiet to keep peace. She understood now that peace built on silence was never peace at all. And as the world adjusted to the truth Richard had tried to outrun, Evelyn felt something settle deep within her. Not victory, freedom. The fallout did not explode. It spread. That was the part no one warned Richard about, the way consequences moved quietly through paperwork and policy, through conversations held behind closed doors, through decisions made without spectacle. There were no shouting matches, no public accusations screamed into microphones. There was simply removal, distance, absence. Evelyn felt it in the subtle shifts. Her phone stopped buzzing with anxious messages from acquaintances who had once hovered politely at the edge of her life. Invitations dried up. Then unexpectedly new ones appeared, measured, careful, curious. People who had never truly seen her before were suddenly interested. She declined them all. This phase wasn't about visibility. It was about precision. Daniel explained it clearly during their next meeting. "The review has expanded," he said. "What began as governance oversight is now financial." Evelyn didn't flinch. Meaning they're tracing decisions," Daniel replied. "And Richard made too many of them alone." Evelyn leaned back in her chair. "How long does this take? As long as it needs to," Daniel said. "The system doesn't rush when it smells liability." That afternoon, Evelyn met with Thomas Reed to finalize protections she had delayed until now. Trusts were restructured, accounts insulated, future contingencies mapped with care. Nothing extravagant, nothing reactive. "People assume wealth makes you reckless," Thomas observed. "In reality, it rewards restraint." Evelyn nodded. "I don't want to win loudly." Thomas smiled faintly. "You already haven't." At home, Lucas adjusted in his own quiet way. He asked fewer questions about his father, not because he didn't care, but because he sensed stability returning. He focused on school, on friends, on routine. One evening, while working on homework at the kitchen table, he looked up suddenly. "Mom," he said, "did Dad lose his job because of you?" The question was simple, direct, heavy. Evelyn closed her laptop and sat across from him. She chose her words with care, not to protect Richard, but to protect Lucas. "No," she said. "Your father lost his position because of choices he made over time." Lucas frowned. "But you didn't stop it." Evelyn nodded. "I didn't interfere with the truth." Lucas considered that. "Is that the same thing?" "No," Evelyn said gently. "Stopping someone means taking their responsibility. Letting consequences happen means respecting it." Lucas leaned back in his chair. "I think I understand." That night, Richard called. Evelyn almost didn't answer. Almost. But this time she did. His voice sounded different, strained, stripped of performance. "They're going after everything," he said. "My reputation, my future." Evelyn listened. She did not interrupt. "You could help me," he continued. "You know things. You could speak up." Evelyn's response was calm. "I've already spoken by telling the truth when asked." "That's not enough," Richard snapped. "They're assuming intent." Evelyn paused. "Then prove there wasn't any." Silence followed. "You don't understand what this does to me," he said quietly. Evelyn closed her eyes, not in exhaustion, but in finality. "I understand what living without accountability does to people around you. I lived with it for years." "Evelyn, I won't be your shield anymore," she said. "And I won't be your excuse." He hung up without another word. The next days unfolded with deliberate calm. A notice arrived confirming temporary asset freezes, specific, limited, targeted. Richard's access narrowed further. Advisors withdrew. Old allies disappeared. Margaret sent one final message. "I resigned today. I couldn't stay anymore." Evelyn replied with sincerity. "I hope you find peace." Margaret responded. "I already have." Evelyn understood that feeling. As the legal process advanced, Daniel's updates became shorter, less speculative, more conclusive. "They found what we expected," he said during one call. "Nothing dramatic, just enough. Enough for what Evelyn asked. Enough to close the loop," Daniel replied. The hearing itself was procedural. Evelyn didn't attend. She didn't need to. Her presence wasn't required to validate facts already recorded. Richard was not charged publicly. There were no headlines screaming scandal. Instead, there was a settlement. Quiet, comprehensive, restrictive. When Daniel called with the final terms, Evelyn listened without expression. "It's over," he said. Evelyn exhaled slowly. "And Lucas protected?" Daniel replied. "Fully." That night, Evelyn sat alone on the back porch, the air cool against her skin. The house behind her felt solid now, anchored, no longer bracing. She didn't feel joy. She felt completion. Richard sent one last message weeks later. I never thought you'd do this." Evelyn stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. "I didn't do anything. I stopped covering for you." She turned the phone off. The next morning, Evelyn took Lucas out for breakfast, something small, ordinary grounding. As they sat across from each other, sunlight spilling through the window, Lucas looked up suddenly. "You're different," he said. Evelyn smiled. "How you're lighter," he said, searching for the word, "but stronger." Evelyn reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "That's what happens when you stop carrying things that were never yours." As they left the cafe, Evelyn caught her reflection in the glass. She stood straighter now, not out of defiance, but alignment. The woman looking back at her wasn't hardened. She was clear. The storm had passed not with thunder, but with consequence. And in the quiet that followed, Evelyn realized something important. Justice didn't arrive as a dramatic reversal. It arrived as balance restored. Richard's downfall did not end with the settlement. It only removed the armor. In the weeks that followed, the world adjusted its distance from him with quiet efficiency. Invitations stopped arriving. Calls went unanswered. Former colleagues replied with polite delays that stretched into silence. He was no longer consulted, no longer deferred to, no longer feared. Evelyn observed it all from a deliberate distance. She didn't monitor him. She didn't ask for updates. Information arrived anyway, filtered through Daniels or through Thomas, through the subtle shifts that always followed public disgrace. The system had finished with Richard. What remained was a man forced to live without the echo of power. The first sign came through Lucas. "He came to my game," Lucas said one evening, removing his shoes by the door. "Dad, I mean." Evelyn looked up from the kitchen counter. "Did he talk to you?" Lucas shrugged. "He watched. He left early." Evelyn nodded. "How did that make you feel?" Lucas thought for a moment. "Confused, but not bad." Evelyn smiled gently. "That's okay." Richard tried to rebuild control where he still believed it existed through narrative. He spoke to a journalist he trusted, offering a version of events framed around misunderstanding and stress. The article appeared briefly, then vanished under correction requests and quiet legal pressure. Truth didn't need to argue. It only needed time. One afternoon, Daniel called with a tone Evelyn recognized, not urgency, but closure. "There's one more matter," he said. "A civil inquiry. Minor, but it involves your name." Evelyn's expression remained calm. "Tell me." "He listed you as a consenting party on an older authorization," Daniel explained. "One we already reviewed." Evelyn exhaled slowly. And it doesn't hold," Daniel replied. "But he's clinging to it." Evelyn understood immediately. This wasn't strategy. It was desperation. Richard called that night. Evelyn answered without hesitation. "I need you to clarify something," he said, his voice tight. "Just one statement. It would help." Evelyn leaned against the counter, the phone cool in her hand. "Help who me?" he said. "They think I acted alone." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. "You did." "That's not fair," Richard snapped. "You signed things." Evelyn's voice was steady. "I trusted you. That doesn't make me complicit." "You're ruining me," he said. Evelyn corrected him gently. "No, I stopped rescuing you." There was a pause, long, heavy. "I built everything for us," Richard said finally. "You wouldn't have any of this without me." Evelyn opened her eyes. "You're wrong," she said quietly. "I had myself before you. I just forgot." He hung up. The inquiry concluded within weeks, predictably, quietly. Richard's remaining leverage evaporated. What was left was not punishment, but irrelevance. Evelyn felt no satisfaction in that. She felt resolution. With the legal noise fading, Evelyn turned her attention inward. Not to heal loudly, not to reinvent herself publicly, but to recalibrate. She began mornings earlier, walking through the neighborhood while the world still slept. She read books she'd once postponed. She attended meetings by choice, not obligation. Thomas invited her to sit in on a philanthropic board discussion, informal, exploratory. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, people leaned in. You don't posture, one woman observed afterward. You just decide. Evelyn smiled faintly. I've had practice. Lucas adjusted too. His laughter returned in fuller measure. He slept better. He argued less. One evening while doing homework, he looked up suddenly. Mom, he said, are you proud of yourself? The question caught her off guard. I'm at peace with myself, she replied after a moment. That's better. Lucas nodded. I think so too. Richard attempted one final approach this time through nostalgia. A handwritten note arrived in the mail. Evelyn recognized his handwriting immediately. She read it once, then folded it carefully. I miss what we were. Evelyn didn't respond. She didn't need to remind him that what they were had been sustained by her silence. That what he missed was convenience, not connection. Weeks passed, then months. Richard moved out of the city, quietly, without announcement. He took a consulting role abroad, smaller, less visible, far from scrutiny. His name faded from conversation, from relevance. Evelyn noticed the absence not as loss, but as space. One afternoon, she and Lucas visited a park near the river. They sat on a bench watching the water move steadily forward. Do you think Dad's okay? Lucas asked. Evelyn considered the question with honesty. I think your father is learning what it's like to live without shortcuts. Lucas nodded. Is that bad? It's necessary, Evelyn replied. As the sun dipped lower, Evelyn felt a quiet gratitude not for the pain that had brought her here, but for the clarity it had left behind. She had not emerged hardened. She had emerged aligned. Later that evening, Daniel sent a final message. All matters closed. Evelyn stared at the words for a long moment, then set the phone down. She stood by the window, the city lights flickering on, and reflected not on what she had won, but on what she had reclaimed. Her voice, her time, her future. Richard had lost everything he thought defined him. Evelyn had gained everything she once gave away. And as the night settled into stillness, she understood something essential. The greatest consequence Richard faced was not public removal or financial reckoning. It was being left behind by a woman who no longer needed to look back. Justice did not arrive with applause. It arrived quietly in the way Evelyn now recognized as permanent. The house settled into a rhythm that felt earned rather than enforced. Bills arrived and were paid without tension. Decisions were made without second-guessing. There were no negotiations happening in the background. No calculations about how a reaction might be received. For the first time in decades, Evelyn's choices belonged entirely to her. Daniel called one final time, not with updates, but with confirmation. There's nothing else pending, he said. No loose ends, no leverage left on his side. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. Then this chapter is closed. Yes, Daniel replied. And you handled it. Cleanly. After the call ended, Evelyn sat still for a moment. She didn't feel the urge to celebrate. She didn't feel like mourning either. What she felt was alignment, the rare peace that came when actions matched values, when silence was no longer a concession, but a choice. Lucas noticed the change before anyone else. You don't check your phone like you used to, he said one evening as they cleared the table together. Evelyn smiled. I don't have to anymore. Because no one's yelling at you? Lucas asked. Evelyn paused, then shook her head gently. Because I stopped living on someone else's emergency. Lucas thought about that. I like this version of quiet. So do I, Evelyn said. She began turning her attention toward what came next, not in a rush, not with ambition disguised as urgency, but with intention. Thomas introduced her to a small circle of women who served on boards quietly, deliberately, without spectacle. They met over coffee, exchanged insights, shared experiences without competition. Evelyn listened. She spoke when it mattered. And when she did, the room changed. One woman leaned over afterward and said, You don't fight for attention. Evelyn smiled faintly. I don't need to. The question of forgiveness surfaced occasionally, usually from people who hadn't lived through betrayal, who spoke of closure as something owed to others. Evelyn understood now that forgiveness was not a performance. It was a boundary. She did not wish Richard harm. She did not seek reconciliation. She simply refused to carry his choices any longer. That was not cruelty. That was clarity. One afternoon, while organizing old boxes in the garage, Evelyn came across a familiar object, a framed photograph from years ago. Smiling family, a version of herself she barely recognized. She studied it for a moment, then set it aside, not in anger, not in regret, but in acknowledgement. That woman had done her best with the information she had at the time. And now she had done better. Lucas joined her, holding a stack of papers. "Do we need these?" he asked. Evelyn glanced at them old documents, outdated plans. "No," she said, "we don't." They carried the boxes together to donation bins and recycling, letting go of what no longer served them. That evening, Evelyn cooked a simple meal. Nothing elaborate, just food that felt grounding. As they ate, Lucas looked up suddenly. "Mom," he said, "I think Dad thought being loud meant being strong." Evelyn nodded. "A lot of people think that." "But you weren't loud," Lucas continued. "And you still won." Evelyn corrected him gently. "I didn't win. I chose." Lucas smiled. "That's better." The world outside continued its quiet adjustments. Richard's name surfaced less and less. New leaders took his place. New stories replaced old ones. The system moved on, as it always did. Evelyn did too. She began volunteering not publicly, not for recognition, but because she wanted to. She supported organizations that helped women navigate financial independence after long marriages, offering guidance without judgment, sharing knowledge without projection. She never told her full story. She didn't need to. Her presence alone spoke volumes. One evening, a woman approached her after a meeting. "How did you do it?" she asked softly. "How did you stay so calm?" Evelyn considered the question carefully. "Because I stopped trying to be understood by the person who was hurting me," she said, "and started understanding myself." The woman nodded, eyes shining. At home that night, Evelyn stood on the porch watching the stars emerge one by one. The air was cool, steady. She felt grounded in a way she hadn't known before. Justice had come not as punishment, not as revenge, but as balance restored. Richard had been removed from positions of power because he misused them. Evelyn had stepped into her own because she respected them. That difference mattered. As she turned back inside, Lucas was waiting at the table with a book. "Ready for our chapter?" he asked. Evelyn smiled, always, and as she sat beside her son reading aloud, in the quiet house they had rebuilt together, Evelyn understood the final truth of it all. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't demand witnesses. It didn't seek applause. It simply made room for healing. And in that room, Evelyn Carter had finally come home to herself. Evelyn's life did not transform overnight. It settled. That was the difference she felt most clearly, not a rush forward, not a dramatic reinvention, but a steady alignment that held under pressure. Days passed without urgency. Weeks unfolded without dread. The future no longer felt like something she had to brace for. She moved through her mornings with intention. Coffee on the porch. A short walk before the neighborhood woke. Emails answered without obligation. Meetings attended because she chose to be there, not because she was expected. Thomas continued to involve her in quiet advisory roles. Nothing flashy, nothing performative. Rooms where decisions mattered, but voices stayed measured. Evelyn didn't dominate those spaces. She didn't need to. When she spoke, it was because clarity was required, and people listened. "You don't rush," one man remarked after a session. Evelyn smiled politely. Rushing benefits people who are hiding. At home, the rhythm she and Lucas built became something sacred. Homework at the table. Music playing softly while dinner cooked. Conversations that drifted naturally without the need to avoid topics or soften truths. One night, Lucas asked, "Do you ever miss him?" Evelyn considered the question carefully. She didn't deflect. She didn't dramatize. "I miss the idea of who I thought he was," she said. "But I don't miss living without myself." Lucas nodded slowly. That makes sense. Evelyn realized then how much her son had learned, not from lectures, but from watching her choose dignity over reaction. Children didn't need perfect parents. They needed consistent ones. The $80 million remained largely untouched. That surprised people when they learned quietly, indirectly, that she hadn't bought anything extravagant, hadn't announced a new life, hadn't turned her fortune into a spectacle. Evelyn saw money differently now. Not as validation, not as armor, as leverage for freedom. She structured it carefully. Portions allocated to security. Portions invested with restraint. Portions set aside for causes that aligned with her values, not to be seen, not to be thanked, but to matter. When asked once why she remained so private, she answered simply, because peace doesn't need witnesses. Months passed. Richard's name disappeared almost entirely from conversation. He existed somewhere else now, geographically, professionally, emotionally. He no longer reached out. No messages. No attempts at explanation or reconciliation. Evelyn didn't wonder why. Some endings didn't need understanding. They needed acceptance. One afternoon, she received a letter forwarded through Daniel's office. It was short, formal, unsentimental. Richard had finalized his relocation. Custody arrangements remained unchanged. Financial matters were closed. There was no apology. Evelyn read the letter once, then placed it in a drawer and closed it. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel relief. She felt finished. That evening, she and Lucas attended a small community event, a local reading, nothing formal. They sat in folding chairs, listening as voices took turns telling stories about lost resilience, quiet triumph. Lucas leaned over halfway through. "Your story would fit here," he whispered. Evelyn smiled gently. Some stories are meant to be lived, not told. Afterward, as they walked home under streetlights, Lucas skipped ahead carefree. Evelyn watched him heartful, not with pride alone, but with gratitude. She had protected him, not by fighting loudly, but by standing firmly. Later that night, Evelyn stood in front of the mirror, studying her reflection. The lines on her face hadn't vanished. They didn't need to. They told the truth of years spent holding things together, of lessons learned without shortcuts. She didn't see a woman hardened by betrayal. She saw a woman refined by clarity. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from one of the women she'd been mentoring. "I said no today. For the first time." And it felt powerful. Evelyn typed back gently. "That's not power. That's alignment. Keep going." She set the phone down and turned off the light. As she lay in bed, the house quiet around her, Evelyn reflected not on what she had endured, but on what she had chosen. She had chosen silence when noise would have fed chaos. She had chosen preparation over confrontation. She had chosen dignity over validation. And in doing so, she had rewritten the outcome entirely. Justice had come not as revenge, not as spectacle, but as truth finally standing without support. Healing had followed, not as forgetting, but as release. Evelyn closed her eyes, breathing evenly. Tomorrow would arrive as it always did. But this time, it would arrive on her terms. And that was everything. Sometimes the most powerful transformation doesn't come from shouting your pain into the world, but from choosing yourself in silence. Evelyn's journey reminds us that dignity is not weakness, and patience is not surrender. Real strength is knowing when to stop explaining, when to stop begging for understanding, and when to let truth speak through action instead of words. Justice doesn't always arrive with noise or revenge. Often it comes quietly restoring balance, while healing the parts of us that were never meant to be broken. This story is a reminder that it's never too late to reclaim your voice, your boundaries, and your life, no matter how long you've stood in the background. When a woman stops carrying what was never hers to begin with, she doesn't just survive. She rises calmly and completely. If this story touched you, let us know in the comments what moment resonated with you the most and where you're watching from. Your voice matters here, and if you believe in stories of quiet strength, delayed justice, and women who rise without hatred, don't forget to subscribe. More powerful stories are waiting for you.